will bring people to himself, either in the first place by those who use their fu'ad and the basar and the sam, and they now respond to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala naturally, or those who listen to the messengers and they respond to the da'i of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or they respond to the punishment. When punishment hits, that's when they remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or perhaps at the time of the death they remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they realize the fruitlessness of their own wasted lives, or perhaps in the end, in one way or another, through the purification stage in the fire, they might finally respond and turn to Allah Azza wa Jal. So altogether we see that this surah, in fact, is a connected whole. Surah 46, Surah Al-Ahqaf in the Quran, is a surah that has a consistent and sustained message throughout. People who read the Quran and find that they're not understanding it and they're not seeing the connection might be missing something. And if you go and study this surah yourself, look at the beginning and look at the end, you will see how the two are connected together, and you will see how the rest of the message in fact flows continuously from the beginning to the end. Not only that, but you will see that this last of the 7 surahs which make up the Hawamim group in fact puts a cap on it. If the whole idea of these Hawamim surahs was that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a message delivered by the prophets, this last ayah just has a single word between 2 stops. Balagh. Balagh. Between 2 stops. That's all it says. Balagh. Which means that the stamp has been put on it that now the message has been delivered. These 7 surahs together have now come to a conclusion in the last of the 7. So they're not entitled Hawamim for nothing, and they do not have the singular and similar beginning for nothing. They are together a group of surahs, and there are ways in which the Quran is connected within itself, verses and surahs together, that at first misses the eye, but is left to students to painstakingly work on it and to discover the meaning of the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. It is now left to you to go read the surah on your own. We couldn't cover it in all of its details. Ponder its meanings, and to be determined to live this in your own lives. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ به تعالى من شرور أنفسنا وسيئات أعمالنا ما يهده الله فلا مضل له وما يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن سيدنا محمدا عبد الله ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. وصلى الله تعالى على جميع الأنبياء والمرسلين والملائكة المقربين والخلفاء الراشدين أبي بكر وعمر وعثمان وعلي ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم اغفر لنا ولإخواننا الذين سبقونا بالإيمان ولا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا ربنا إنك رؤوف رحيم. اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم والأموات إنك سميع قريب مجيب الدعوات. اللهم أيد الإسلام والمسلمين. اللهم انصر من نصر دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم واجعلنا منهم. اللهم اخذل من خذل دين محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ولا تجعلنا معهم. بعد الله رحمكم الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله.
الكتاب ولم يجهل له إواجه أحمدوه سبحانه وتعالى أشكره وحوى أحل الحمد وثانه وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله المصطفى. اللهم صل وسلم على عبدك ورسولك محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. أما بعد. يا أيها الذين آمنوا واتقوا الله في أمان الله. We thank Allah. We give praises to Allah and Allah alone, who has sent to us this book, the Quran, with his messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, In it there is no deviation, no error, no distortion. We praise Allah, and we praise Allah alone. And indeed it is to Allah alone all of our praises are due, all of our gratitudes are due, to Allah and Allah alone. I bear witness and I give testimony that there is no deity, nothing deserves to be worshipped save Allah and Allah alone. And I bear witness and I give testimony that Muhammad ibn Abdullah of 1400 years ago is the last and the final messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the seal of the prophethood, and indeed there is none to come after him. Oh, you believe, trust in Allah, hold on to the handle of Islam and never let go. Oh, you believe, worship Allah and fear Allah as He should be feared. O Muslims, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed in the Quran to us all of the ayat throughout the Quran, from the beginning to the end of the Quran, as a mercy to humanity. These ayats throughout the Quran is a guidance for humanity so that we as human beings can utilize the benefits of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and utilize the benefits in such a way that we will be just to each other and we will be just to ourselves. O Muslims, Allah has pointed out to us in the Quran, Kul huwa Allahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yulad wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. Allah has pointed out to us in the Quran that we are to say He, Allah, is one. This saying that we are commanded to say is not merely a verbal utterance of saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one, but it is indeed a command for us to reorientate our lives and all of our thinking, all of our actions, all of our being towards the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the oneness of His creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created Adam, and from Adam came mankind, the children of Adam. And the children of Adam, from the beginning, has began to forget that they are a family. And this forgetting that they are a family have led them to the position of great injustices committed against other family members. Islam is built on justice. Justice that is universal, and justice that has no limitation of time, but is universal in every aspect and is balanced for the benefit of all of humanity. Those of us who forget the importance of Islam and the justice that Islam brings to humanity, who violates the justice and the code of ethics the balance that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established for the benefit of humanity, those who violate those codes are not only violating the rights of those who they violate, but they are also violating their own rights. Those who are afflicted with injustice and those who afflict injustice are both in a position that they will have a condition of destruction levied against them. When we think back to the Pharaoh levied injustice. And the injustice of Pharaoh eventually came back on Pharaoh himself. When we go throughout history and we recognize all of the injustices that have taken place throughout history, we recognize that one major issue has occurred. And that major issue is we have forgotten the omnipotence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We've forgotten the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have forgotten the scale that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has established, and that if you violate that scale, every action has a reaction. And it is inescapable. It is inescapable. As Muslims, we have the ultimate code of justice for humanity. And when Allah says to us, Kul huwa Allahu ahad, in that statement, that powerful statement, that all-reaching statement, it is bringing our minds to the realization that unless Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is established as the pinnacle of our thought and our very being, unless this is the essence of our lives, then injustice will occur in our lives. Whether we call ourselves Muslims, whether we call ourselves Christians, whether we call ourselves Jews, Zoroastrian, Hindu, Sikh, whatever we call ourselves, whether we claim that we are under the rule of democracy, whether we claim that we're under the rule of anything else that we choose to claim, unless the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the pinnacle of our very thoughts and action, then invariable injustice will occur. Humanity has been challenged. They have been challenged with the final revelation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They've been challenged to accept the ultimate and the pristine dictate of Allah in order to gain the benefits that our hearts, our soul, and our mind desire. But we are short-sighted. We forget. And we allow our emotional pull and desires to warp our thinking. So humanity has taken the terminology of justice, and we've taken the essence out of justice. We've taken the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala out of justice. And that justice has been translated throughout the annals of history. Rather than one word, it has translated in action into two words. So justice is now in essence just us. What do I mean by this? When Pharaoh took a group of people and enslaved them to do his bidding so that he can build his empire, he was thinking of just him. Just his people. Just his group. So Pharaoh began to operate on the basis of not justice, but just us. When we begin to look at each other than equal in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we are operating on the same disease, dementing theology of just us. We can show throughout history the problems that have occurred. But this will make for a very long talk. We'll have to find another time for that. But for now, let us recognize that we as Muslims have a responsibility. And the responsibility is thus. We are to eliminate injustices around the world, anywhere that it occurs, to whomever it occurs, and in any direction or methodology that has been used to propagate it. That's our duty. That's our responsibility. To establish justice and to wrong any right that has been done to any people throughout history, and to bring equality and bring the equilibrium of justice back into play in the life of humanity, is to live according to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Kul huwa Allahu ahad. Whenever we do not implement justice around the world, in our lives, in our thinking, in our feelings, in our action, whenever we are not moved by wrong done to any people around the world at any time, whenever we're not moved to action, to eliminate, to eradicate, to restore justice for all people around the world, then we are not living to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Kul huwa Allahu ahad. And indeed, the salams in Islam has been removed. The salams in Islam is only there when justice, equilibrium, peace is brought about. And peace can be only brought about when justice is done for all of humanity. And that can only be so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the pinnacle of the thought of all of humanity. So we have a job. We have a responsibility. And no longer can we say, well, you know, that didn't affect me. No longer can you say, that's those people and not me. The ideology of them and us is an ideology that we have to eliminate in our minds. We have to eliminate in our hearts. We have to recognize that all people are coming from our father Adam. And the justice that we require for ourselves, the pain that we feel when we are wrong, is the pain that is felt by all people when they are wrong. And it is our job to restore that. Brothers and sisters, history has showed us some painful examples. And we have them enlisted in different categories. We can go over many, but let me just reflect on a few, and one in particular. That is, when we look at the history of Spain, we see where the Muslims began to forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and began to think of, rather than justice, they began to think of just us. We see where Muslims began to think of their own needs and their own desires, and they sided with those who choose to split them in ranks and groups for their own benefit, who were also thinking of just them rather than justice. And in that, history recorded the onslaught and the slaughtering of Muslims, women and children, in droves, and injustice. But bring it down. In this society, we're faced with, in this world, we're faced with people putting into different structural class structure that is a living injustice. Whether it's the class structure that is established in India, where they have the untouchables and others, where a whole group of people has been designed for the lowest level of society, only to be in a position of servitude. We also go to the issue of the continent that is known as Africa, where they went to that continent, and again, like they did in Spain, they divided the Muslims and the groups and the people into ranks and had them fighting against each other. And while they were fighting, and incidentally, the derivatives, the flame of that warfare still exists today. Today in Africa, the whole continent is ablaze still of warfare, tribal warfares and the likes. Even amongst the Muslims, look what happened just recently in Somalia amongst Muslims, subhanAllah. They have separated the peoples thinking against each other, and they started the greatest atrocity that has ever been committed in the recorded history, and that is the slave trade that they started. That they brought untold numbers, the numbers vary from 50 million to 100 million of Africans that were brought to this part of the world. A good 60% of them never made it to the shore. They were killed or they died in the inhumane way in which they traveled to this part of the land. They were thrown overboard to feed the sharks. And we know that a great majority of them were Muslims. A great majority of them were Muslims. And that debilitating, barbaric, inhumane way that those who even landed on the shores have been treated to such an extent that all of the descendants of those people are suffering sociological, psychological, debilitating positions and conditions that have not even been recorded in the books. And these conditions are going to and is affecting every one of us today. The disillusionment of a people, whereas the African, those of darker complexion were put on the ranks of society. And you have a category of the fairer you are, the higher you are in the ranks of society, have been put there to divide humanity. And the Muslims are suffering from that today. We have this problem within us. We are also categorizing ourselves on the same ranking, the evil ranking that have been crept into our hearts and into our minds. This situation exists, and we, the ones who have this book, the Quran, we, the ones who have the book that says, Qul huwa Allahu ahad, we have the corrective methodology to cure the ills and the psychosis that exists amongst these people and amongst all of us. But will we take the responsibility on? Will we take the job that has been given to us? Or will we sit on the sideline and say, that's them, this is us? Will we see that any injustice that is shown to us is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenging us to live up to our deen? Any injustice that we see in the society that we live in, the world at large, it is our job to correct it. We cannot wait on anyone else to correct it. We have to stand up with whatever we have, however we can, in whatever way we can. We have to stand up and implement justice. Or we will be accountable on the day of judgment for the inapathy, the inaction, the lax attitude, and the forgetting of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We will be accountable. We have to right the wrong that has been done to any people, wherever they are and whoever they are. That is our job. That is our responsibility. May Allah strengthen us. May Allah help us to live up to our responsibility. May Allah help us to remember that He is one and one alone. May Allah help us to live according to this dictate, the wonders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah help us to project our lives, our attitude, and every aspect of our being according to the wonders of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah help us to purify our hearts and eliminate the poison and the disease of separation that have been poured into our hearts, so that we will live as one humanity, that we will correct the wrongs of all humanity, that we will project the truth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. May Allah strengthen us, may Allah guide us to Siratul Mustaqim, so we will walk that straight path, live according to His dictate, live according to His deen, so when the day of judgment comes to us, may Allah grant us good on this day of judgment. May Allah forgive us. May Allah grant us liberation in the grave, and may Allah grant us Jannah. The job that we have is tremendous. It is momentous. In the minds of those who have separated from the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we might see that job as impossible, unobtainable, and cannot be accomplished. But in the minds and the hearts of those who hold on to the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, hold on to the dictates of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they see this job as just a stepping stone to Jannah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the examples. And the chief example is Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. When he came in the time of Jahiliyyah, tremendous injustices were occurring. He did not say, I am alone. He did not say, I cannot do this job, the power is too overwhelming. But he submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and systematically set about to spread the truth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to give hope to the people who have lost all hope. Some of the first who came into Islam were amongst those who were at the bottom of society, those who were enslaved. Bilal, Sumaya, and many others, amongst the first of the Sahabas who came into Islam. So Islam speaks to the hearts and the minds of those who have lost all hope and elevate them to the position of hope. Islam established an equilibrium amongst all of humanity. And it is our job now to Kul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yulid wa lam yulad, wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. This is our job. This is our duty. This is our responsibility. And we are held accountable to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment for the lack of fulfillment of this job, this duty, and this responsibility. May we be held in the position that we fulfill this job and we gain the shades of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on this day of judgment. The day that we will stand, on that day that the life that we live here, 50, 60, 100 years, will be insignificant to the day of judgment in time span. It is recorded that the day of judgment will be over 50,000 years of our lifetime. And just the significance of a few short days comparable, minutes, seconds, just the work of that, of establishing justice for that period of time, can grant us shade on the day of judgment for such a long, long time. And inshallah, grant us Jannah. May Allah grant us Jannah. May Allah help us to be under His shade on the day of judgment. May Allah help us to live according to His dictates and what He has commanded of us. May Allah help us to establish justice in this society and in this world so that this justice will come back on us and be just to us and smile on our children and our family because we projected justice in the society around us. May Allah help us not to be short-sighted, but may Allah help us to have a vision and a view that goes beyond ourselves and move us from the position of just us to the position of justice. May Allah have mercy on us. May Allah forgive us our faults. May Allah send His blessing on our beloved Nabi, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May Allah send His blessing upon all of us as Muslims, the family of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Sahabas, and upon us all as Muslims.